Welcome to A Look Inside. I'm your host, Demetria, and today's special guest is C.A. Gordon, author of Teen Justice, Justice Has a Curfew, Book 1 and 2.
Hi,
Welcome,
Demetria.
welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Glad to have you. So let's get into Book 1 because I know there are readers out there who need a backstory before we dive into Book 2. So,
Mm.
what inspired you to write a story about teenage superheroes dealing with societal fear and prejudice? And was there a specific moment or idea that sparked this concept?
So I have loved superheroes my whole life. My first fully formed memory is of seeing Batman at the movie theater, drive-in when I was 3, and
Oh,
Keaton
wow.
doing the cape, and just and I suppose I just never really grew out of the childhood desire to be a
Mhm.
superhero. And I would go on little adventures with my friends, and we'd play superheroes. And then in middle school, I said to my mom, I still want to be one. She said, well, be one. And then I started writing adventures about me as a superhero with others. And the larger themes of societal prejudice and things like that, they didn't really come into play. I was just trying to write adventures of me and my friends.
Mhm.
And it seemed as though organically they started touching on those themes.
Okay. So, the concept of enhanthroids, am I saying that correctly?
Yes, you are.
Okay, so it seems to be a central part of the story. So, how did you develop that idea and the idea of their powers and the societal reaction to them?
Well, I got to preface that answer by saying the choice to give my kids powers was easily the hardest decision I've made creatively.
Mhm.
Originally, Teen Justice was going to be the Justice Teens, a group of 5 normal teenagers who were vigilantes, and they used gadgets to defeat villains, and there were explosions, kind of the opposite of what they became. And it was going to be my love letter to condense all of the different tropes and things I'd loved about superheroes into one story with my own twist on it. But then I realized the name Anthrax is kind of cool.
Mhm.
And it certainly was in 2001, 2002, right after 9/11, and Anthrax, the scare was everything. And I said,
Mhm.
well, maybe if I do superpowers, I was initially intimidated because there's this huge blooming kind of thing about them. What are the
Mhm.
rules of them? How vast can you make them? How does that affect the reality of a story you're telling? And then also the fact that once you add powers to the mix, the themes
Mhm.
of society's reaction and prejudice, they're kind of baked in. And that territory has been well and truly covered over 60 plus years with the X-Men and other things like that.
Mhm.
So philosophically, I decided to go the other way. There's a line in The Incredibles where the bad guy is explaining why he's being a bad guy. And his
Mhm.
philosophy is like, when everyone's special, no one will be. And I said, well, I don't want to necessarily use that in a bad sense, but I
Mhm.
wanted people with superpowers to be as normal as waiting in the line at the DMV. So
Yeah.
I said, okay, let's create this virus. Let's have the majority of the people in this city have it. That
Mhm.
way, it does 2 things. One, I can create a library of superpowers based on people's personality traits, right? So
Mhm.
that makes I can explore personality quirks and enhance them. But then it also means I can sort of bank other ones and just refer to it like normal. So I really wanted to take those issues and make them mundane so that we're
Mhm.
not sitting in the world of, oh my gosh, this has happened, as opposed to, okay, just how do we deal with it?
Yeah. Yeah, I like that. So let's talk about Silver City. It seems to be a layered structure and is unique and symbolic. So how does the city itself reflect themes such as class and power and societal divides in the story?
Mm. Well, I grew up in San Diego County, and I've been to, unfortunately, it's no longer there, but Qualcomm Stadium is where the Chargers used to play, and the Padres until they got their own stadium. And
Okay.
Qualcomm Stadium, which had several large ramps that were
Mhm.
circular that took you from ground level up to the view. So I think it was about 4 or 5 layers. to the stadium itself. And
Mhm.
I've been a fan of anime and series that have these sprawling urban landscapes and
Mhm.
Gotham and Metropolis. They're these big cities and buildings are thousands of feet high and you see multiple layers of freeways. And
Mhm.
I said, well, what if I just made a city that had actual layers? And that
Mhm.
way you could have different emotions that are
Mhm.
evoked by the citizens and one another. And then organically, it seemed like, well, how would you approach building a city like this? And I
Mhm.
came up with this concept of earthquakes, which is not a stranger to California. And
Right.
okay, well, on the way to fixing from under sea level up, we're just going to
Mhm.
naturally build up. And what seems to happen in a literal sense is, well, in a figurative sense, is people who do well economically, they move on up.
Mhm.
They move
Mhm.
out of one area to another. Used to be the suburbs were the ideal place to go because you had to drive into the city to work at. Then years later,
Mhm.
with gentrification, the city center becomes really popular. And
Mhm.
gradually, I just decided, okay, let's have this be a natural reflection of the economics. So I decided that sea level and above would represent higher income brackets, and a layer below would be mostly industrial facilities. Because that's the thing, too. Like, I wanted a pretty city, and when you
Uh-huh.
get power plants and warehouses and things like that, yeah, kind of ugly. And then I decided that the original layer of the city at the bottom would be the one that everyone deserted. And unfortunately, like a lot of projects and urban housing and even old military bases, they sometimes become public housing and benefit from
Mhm.
those. So
Mhm.
people with reduced income often find themselves in less than stellar economic situations. And so I kind of said, okay, let's have the upper layers be nicer, then the lower layers be a little
Mhm.
bit lower. And as far as the naming of them, I wanted to. It's my love letter to different character or actors who have portrayed Batman over the years. So the top echelon is
Okay.
Conroy in memory of Kevin Conroy, who to many people of my generation and others is the most perfect depiction of the character.
Oh my goodness.
Val Kilmer doesn't get a lot of respect or credit for his time in the suit, but he did really good. Mm-hmm. Is Ground Zero, Keaton, because he's the first and my personal favorite. Um,
Mhm.
Lowry is a name that he was an actor who portrayed him in the serials in the 40s. And originally it was going to be like West, but I love Adam West, so I wasn't going to do that to
Mhm.
him. And then the bottom uh,
Mhm.
is Clooney after George Clooney's depiction in Batman and Robin. But I wanted to give it I came up with the name The Cradle first
Mhm.
because the way the city was structured. And
Mhm.
I decided, well, let's recycle the joke of Clooney being bad Batman. So if you live in Clooney, you live in the ghetto.
Oh wow. Wow. Oh wow. I like Clooney, but
Too.
not as
And
much as Keaton.
that's the beauty of like knowing being a lifer as a fan of Batman and superheroes and stuff,
Mhm.
you do the full spectrum of love, hate, great, all of those things. And at the end of the day, I'm in for it. So I appreciate every depiction of the character, and
Yeah.
hopefully that's something that that's the goal is to create characters that hopefully have a lifespan that can go through many iterations and be
Yeah.
appreciated on different fronts.
Hmm. Okay. So, how did you balance the action with the need to introduce readers to the story's world and premise?
I wrote the ending to book one first, and as a fan of storytelling and wanting to write cinematically, the
Mhm.
influences that I use for my own storytelling are more cinematic. I really appreciate movie books or
Mhm. Mhm.
novelizations of movies. And the challenge with gaining readers' attention is to have something gripping. And so, yes, I started with a bit of an action piece and I'm working sort of backwards. But ultimately, I credit my English teachers and look at the stories that I've really appreciated that find a balance between action, character development, and exposition. And so
Mhm.
my goal is to not necessarily look at it clinically and go, right here we need an action piece, right here we need to let the audience breathe. But they're certainly playing in the back of my head.
Yeah. You can tell in how you write, that there was careful thought put into it. And you can actually see the scenes unfolding like a movie. And that's how I prefer to read my books.
Mm.
As a writer myself, I like to write like that as well because I don't want people to just read words on the page. I want you to be able to visualize this like as if you're watching a movie. And I
Mm.
think you do so well in your writing. You can tell, from your talent as a writer that you do that so well. So
Thank you.
that's how it came off to me.
I Back in 2001 or two, when they released the Back to the Future trilogy on DVD with special features, Robert Zemeckis and Robert Gale, the director and the co-writers, the two of them, they were answering questions. And the approach that they took to writing that script, which is actually used in film classes as an example of a perfect setup, payoff. It is almost a perfect story. But the two Bobs were explaining that their writing process would be something as simple as, well, we want Marty to invent the skateboard, so we need to write a scene where we show Marty riding a skateboard. And also, we want Marty to invent rock and roll, so we need to see earlier that he can play the guitar. And they
Mhm.
would use post-its and a push pin on a pegboard. And so, in conceptualizing book one, I took that same approach. And eventually, that translated into me opening up a blank Word document and saying scene colon, and then eventually writing the scene that would have some action in it, and then
Mhm.
writing dialogue as if it were a teleplay, and then writing it with some character notes to
Mhm.
incorporate into those chapters.
I do have a question. When you were talking about writing the dialogue and the scenes, which one do you find more challenging, if at all? Writing the atmospheric descriptions and the setting or writing the dialogue?
You're not gonna like this answer. They take turns. They take turns being equally challenging, and here's why. If it's an
Okay.
atmospheric scene, describing setting up the scene is an exercise in pacing.
Hmm.
So the beauty of being a writer is that you can incorporate all elements of a storyteller's process. A director's got his camera shots. A musician has either their beat or their melody or their lyrics. As a writer with words on a page, I envision the camera like this, and you go up and down and around and down and down, and you zoom in and out and all that and pan. And so, if I'm approaching an atmospheric scene, I need to figure out how long do I want my reader's eyes to be in this scene
Yeah.
before the action or the dialogue takes place.
Hmm.
Conversely, dialogue is we all as consumers have a beautiful ability to detect inauthenticity, artifice.
Hmm.
That's the word I'm looking for. It's like the uncanny valley, right, with AI and
Hmm.
CG.
Hmm.
So I talk the dialogue for every character in every scene. And my poor wife has had to listen, thinking I'm having either a nervous breakdown or that I'm on the phone when I'm really talking between multiple characters, deciding on the flow of the dialogue. So
Hey, poor Mrs. Gordon. But it works out. It's worth it.
yes, it is. In fact, to answer your question directly, I sometimes love writing a scene of dialogue because I know exactly how I want. I approach dialogue with what do I want to hear as a reader, or what do I not want to hear as a reader, and then I
Hmm.
approach an action or an in a the other word atmospheric scene as is dialogue necessary? If so, we'll get to it when we. But how does this move the scene forward?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that's how you write and you talk about it like you've been writing for like 50 years. I know you're nowhere near that old, but you
The gray hairs in my beard that keep appearing would speak differently, but no.
but you know what? I wish that every book that I've read um had had those same thoughts in mind. And and I know everyone has a different strength, when it comes to writing. But I that really reeled me into this. Honestly, confession, when you first came to me with book one, I was thinking, and this isn't a bad thing, but I was thinking, oh, I wonder if this is going to be written in comic book style, because I've had the thick books like that, 300 pages or more, and they have the comic book scenes, but they also have the narrative. And that's what I was thinking. But when I opened it, I'm like, oh, it's actually like a novel. But I would have accepted it either way,
Mm.
because simply because of the premise, But yeah, I just wanted to confess that.
No, I appreciate that, and that's something too that I in the conception process I was like, what format does this live in?
Mhm.
I know how to draw decently, but I'm not a graphic artist,
Mhm.
and I enjoy comic books and I still read them, but I knew that the story that I wanted to tell was larger than certain formats. At the same time, I'm really challenged by condensing ideas into as few words as possible. And so,
Mhm.
as you can tell by the length of my responses, so I thought, well, with the novel, I can flesh things out and I can breathe and I can go on tangents and come back. Because if someone is picking up a novel, they expect to be led on flights of fancy as long as you come back to the main narrative and you can really spend time on character development.
Mhm.
So I love the format of the novel, but I treat it honestly, I treat it like a limited series. Actually, the closest I'd compare my writing and how I'd like to be accepted is to limited anime OVAs. Right. So animes are mostly based on mangas, except for some newer ideas. And the format before we got them here in the States is a limited series of sometimes a one shot, sometimes 3, 6, 13, and then others are 78 and others are hundreds, like Pokemon
Yes.
or Dragon Ball Z. So I feel like I fit into a niche that's somewhere in between what we would now consider a limited Netflix series or a couple of seasons
Yeah.
of a Netflix series, where you can tell an extended
Hmm.
story over
Hmm.
multiple hours, but
Hmm.
there's a couple of main through lines.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's get into some of the characters of the book. Uh, Two of the most prominent characters, even though there were quite a few, but Cameron and Taylor.
Mm-hmm.
Cameron to me came off like a reluctant leader with a lot of responsibility. So, what was your process for creating uh, Cameron's character and the challenges that he faced?
Now it's my confession time.
Uh-oh.
All five mains, Cameron, Taylor, Zach, Nova, and Max, are
Hmm.
me. They are different aspects of my personality fleshed out into fully formed characters. I
Okay.
have been short and funny. I have been smart and asthmatic. I have been grumpy, never a sex symbol, but like I have been I had a disdain for authority, and I have been vapid. Uh, and so over the course of my adolescence and into my 20s. And so really, Teen Justice is a case study in what I like to call revisionist self-autobiography.
Okay, that's an interesting way to put it.
Right. So Cameron, as my main, represents the aspects of adolescence that I wish I had attained at his age. He's the aspirational me,
Okay.
and I like I don't like him just yet as a leader. That's something that I wanted to explore, his growth as a character and his growth into a leader
Mhm.
figure.
Mhm.
Because I believe in team situations, there are born leaders, but I think it's more interesting for me to see a leader develop.
Yeah.
One of the series that I loved as a child, and I still refer back to it, is the Animorphs. And yeah, you know that you've heard that word, you know that name. It's essentially
Yes.
kids who get the ability to turn into animals by an alien, and now they have to defeat the bad guy aliens.
Never
Mm-hmm.
watched it.
Yeah. There
I
was a
know it, but I never watched it.
yeah, it was a book series, and then Nickelodeon made it into a TV show. But the my point is, their leader Jake became the leader over the course of the series, and so I wanted to approach that with Cameron because I now, with some time away from my youth, can look on the aspects of my character and see what I would have liked to achieve earlier, and so that's what I try to infuse in him. Taylor is she represents most of my youth, not quite as an outsider, but as one with very real challenges. I'm an asthmatic. Fortunately, I've grown out of the majority of those challenges, but
Okay.
from age 0 to about 14, 15, I was the kid in the hospital that the class went to visit. and
Oh.
and yes, I appreciate that. But and so I missed a lot of school. I couldn't do sports. I'm
Hmm.
very familiar with the inhaler, um,
Hmm.
and the nebulizer machine. And at the same time, I went to a Montessori preschool, and I was in gait, and I was told by adults that I had a high intellect. And so that was also challenging when you're the nerd. I like to say I was Carlton, I was Urkel until I was 10, and I was Carlton until I was 13. So, so those two characters, I suppose, represent the most, the closest aspects of my personality. The smart but socially awkward one, and the charismatic one who's not quite there yet.
Yeah. Okay. Well, what can you tell me about Max and Nova and Zach?
Mm. Zach might be my favorite me
Which
because
one, Max?
Zach
Zach. Okay.
might be my favorite of the five because, in addition to being short and limited physically for a period, I was also raised as an only child by a single mom. And so
Okay.
you grow up quickly during that time, but you also learn to use humor not only as a defense mechanism for to get out of awkward social situations, but also so that you
Hmm.
can stay in the room with the grown-ups longer. You know, if you can make the grown-ups laugh and quote the movies and make the impressions and stuff,
Hmm.
stay up later. And so all of that goes into Zach, and also without blatantly breaking the fourth wall, I wanted Zach's personality to reflect someone who would observe the subtler aspects of society, but
Hmm.
voice the. I suppose the expression is say the quiet thing, or there's a, right where you say the unspoken thing, right? He
Hmm.
voices his inner monologue for the benefit of an audience, because at the end of the day, someone who's insecure and who uses humor to as a
Hmm.
humor always needs an audience.
Hmm.
Nova it surprised me that her character would take on. I didn't anticipate for Nova's character to be in the form of a teenage girl, because I'm not a teenage
Okay.
girl. And
Hmm.
so I Taylor, I kind of write middle of the road. I now that I'm married and have some nice female influences in my life, I think I'm
Hmm.
getting closer to being able to express female emotions. But with
Hmm.
Nova starting off as this, party person who's very popular, who's very vapid, unfortunately, those are archetypes that work in the guise of a teenage girl. And
Hmm.
so she became an interesting challenge for me to see if I could humanize those elements, but also to trod unfamiliar territory.
Yeah.
a person, one of my doctors said, "Oh, I didn't realize that at one point in your life you were a Kardashian," and that to me was like the highest honor that I could get. Just, I mean, Nova's character is very much typical of what we've seen in that realm. But for me to be able to convey that was
Mm-hmm.
kind of cool. Yeah, and naturally, her and Zach have a salty interaction
Mm-hmm.
because would consider him a booger on the bottom of her shoe, and he's completely unaffected by her and prods and goads her for the fun of it.
Mm-hmm.
But also, she would serve as a lightning rod for Max. And
Mm-hmm.
Max's character, I always end up referencing him last because he is on the outside of the thing, right? And I have had a very, very good childhood, but there are elements that weren't. And we all go through challenges over the course of adolescence and into our adulthood. And I decided with Max that I was just gonna really lean into the emo phase of my development with him, right? This disdain for authority, this indifference to social mores, and yet he's a contradiction because he tries to dress well. He has a sense of dignity, even though he's reluctant about exposing his emotions. They
Mm-hmm.
exist, and he won't ignore them. He's just
Mm-hmm.
ill equipped to respond to them. And at one point in my youth, my mother went from um, being on one side of distributing government assistance to actually needing to benefit from it for a period. And so
Mm-hmm.
I do know what it's like to have very expensive clothing, but also to shop at Walmart or Ross or something, and
Right.
still try to put yourself together professionally or again with
Mm-hmm.
dignity. And so Max to me represents the side of my personality where it's the disdain for the fact that there's a social contract we have to live up to.
Mm-hmm. You know, I found myself relating definitely to Max, but to a lot of things about the characters, especially the way you broke them down. I'm like, you know what? When I look back into my life, you know what? I can relate to that. Even as old as I am now, and obviously these characters are younger than I am, but that they are very relatable, not just to me, but I think to the masses, especially fans of this genre. I think that they would be able to relate to a lot of the characters and the themes in the book.
I
So
hope so.
so I
I appreciate that. Yeah.
mhm, yeah. And that's another thing that I look for when I'm reading books. Like, how can I relate to this? Because if I don't get it, then I'm going to say I don't get it, you know. But every book isn't for everyone. But I love to be able to find something, even if it's one or two things in a book. I love to be able to find something that I can relate to in a book that I'm reading, you know. So I think you brought that out a lot in all the characters.
Thank you.
So book two.
Mm.
So we're building on the foundation of the first one. So how did you approach expanding the world and raising the stakes in book two for the characters?
Book two is really the second act of a three-act structure. Books one, two, and three are one complete story. And unfortunately, I had that itch of like I gotta get something out. So
Mhm.
let's make book one seem to have a beginning, middle, and end, and let's do book two seem to have a beginning, middle, and end. But we can do a cliffhanger, and then so ultimately, book two is the continuation of book one. Practically speaking, I knew that all five of my kids had to get their moment,
Mhm.
and in terms of the logical progression of the story, book two would get the bulk of the other three teens, well, everyone else being able to develop their abilities, and so I wanted to be able to spend some more time with them. I introduced the idea of escalation, because that's something that really is built upon in sequels or follow-ups, right? Usually the
Mhm.
second of a trilogy or of a series expands things or twists
Yeah.
them, and the stakes get higher and so forth. And so those ideas are tried and true. And so I did have those in my head as I was developing them. But with the
Mhm.
characters themselves, I wanted there to be this I wanted this idea of a reluctant family to be
Mhm.
developed. And in order to do that, you had to do a snapshot of each character in their current existence. And then the circumstances that bring them together and either
Mhm.
their resistance to it or their acceptance of it. With Zach, I wanted to introduce this element of discord because the events at the end of book one have the potential to fragment the five of them going forward. And in book two, I specifically wanted to have a scene where Cameron and Zach have it out
Mhm.
because Zach's actions in book one had a significant effect on Cameron and Taylor and others moving forward. And so I need to have a disclaimer. So my two best friends that I started writing adventures of as a kid were Brad and Anna, and Anna was my first crush, and so forth. We did not have this epic breakup, and Bradley and I did not, you know, have our friendship destroyed. We just time and adult serving. We just grew up and grew apart. I moved a city away, and over time we just lost touch. I'm in touch with them again, but I wanted
Mhm.
to clear the air on that. It's like I never got punched in the face by Brad, and I never made out with someone in front of my crush. So, but yeah, going back to the other two characters or the other three characters, I needed to give them a moment where we're in their world, and then stress test their ability to deal with change.
Okay. Can we talk about Taylor's other partner? Or is
Mm.
that how it's put in the book? So what does the aspect of her character reveal about her struggles and her growth?
When I came up with the powers, first
Mhm.
thing I said was, okay, let's make them based on their personality. So I said, okay, it'd be funny to have an asthmatic with super speed. So that's the genesis of
Okay.
Taylor's powers. But the one thing that specifically became of her other her is the
Mhm.
fact that every depiction of someone with super speed ever, they run and then we see their trail follow them.
Mhm.
I said I want to do it backwards. I want to have the speed, the representation of her super speed be the character, and Taylor run to catch up. And so, if this is ever depicted visually, you would see a blue streak zip across, and half a second later, Taylor catch up to her, and the zip would pause, and Taylor would catch up to her.
Mhm.
So visually, that's how the other her came into being. Thematically, I guess it goes back to the idea of me as the asthmatic kid always trying to keep up with everyone else.
Mhm.
Like on the playground, I was always last in sports. Um, would tire out the easiest, and all of those things. And so Taylor views this other her. Initially, she created her mentally as this idea of the ideal her. I mean, I suppose for someone in her circumstance, it was a huge endeavor to try out for the track team. What person who's tied to a rescue inhaler wants to run? In
Right.
addition to, like, she's already a genius, so there's going to be scholarships for everything else. Well, why do this? So I put something for her to achieve, and thematically it represented me creating or completing the book from beginning to end, and then trying to go through the process of publishing it. So the other her is just a literal representation of Taylor's challenge against herself.
Mhm. I really love how I feel like I'm getting so much commentary, like you see in the movies when they have the commentary
Mm.
um on the bonus disc about the movie, and then they break down things that you wouldn't have otherwise know about the movie. I feel like I'm getting a lot of really good tidbits from you on these characters. Like, okay, that helps me understand them better.
Mm,
Okay, so let's talk about Cameron's struggles
mhm.
with guilt and responsibility. How did you explore that in further developing him in by the time we get to book two?
I was always going to have my dad be the bad guy to my mom, only because I was raised not knowing him. And
Okay.
unfortunately for me as a writer, I've since developed contact with him, and he's a great dude. And so I'm gonna have to
Mhm.
that's gonna have to reflect in the writing moving forward. But I told him he's still a bad guy, but but
Sorry,
I
Dad.
wanted to, yeah, I wanted Cameron to have to deal with this struggle of an identity that was thrust upon him.
Mhm.
And so the idea of being the kid of two famous people, the kid of two successful people, sort of, Bruce Wayne-esque in terms of Prince of Gotham, legacy, all of those themes, those were something that I wanted to explore. And then the challenges that he faces between books one and two, this idea of you kind of have things going on pretty well for you, and now in the eyes of society, you're now in this other place. So in book one, he gets into his first fight ever, and it's pathetic because he
Mhm.
doesn't know how to throw a punch, and he barely survives the encounter. In book two, dealing with the weight of it, one thing that I admire about his character is that he accepts the new status quo and says, "Okay, well, let's just dive into this, and what comes along will just endure as it happens."
Mhm.
So, because his connection to Taylor was so strong, I think that just pushes his own insecurities about himself to the side because it doesn't matter anymore, right? The now is now, and if someone's going to be, he's used to being a figurehead, right? Because both his family is the face of a thing. And no doubt he's been in lots of promotional videos and posters and always being interviewed and things like that. So he's comfortable doing it. If someone's got to be the face of a positive approach to having anthrax,
Mhm.
he seems like, okay, if not me, then who?
Okay. So let's talk about the vulnerable moments and the intense action moments in book two. I mean, the same as book one as well. So, how did you ensure these elements complemented each other? Because you have a good balance of both, among other things. So, was there any difficulty balancing those elements or making sure that they complemented each other?
First of all, thank you for saying that. I do appreciate seeing it structurally because I thought of this what is going to be a trilogy as one story
Mhm.
and taking the approach that the Back to the Future writers have to plotting scenes and balancing them with dialogue and softer moments as well as action, I guess what they would call set pieces. There
Mhm.
was a conscious effort to be balanced. I did realize upon reviewing one after two was released that the pacing between one and two is a bit different in that the stakes were heavier emotionally in one. And even though that's not to minimize them in two, there's just a lot more literal manifestation because now powers are at play and people are doing things and there's literal circumstances where this can be translated. And so I found that striking a balance between action and softer and vulnerable moments, life doesn't give you that option. And
Mhm.
so when Taylor manifests her abilities and there's the emotion between Cameron and her parents, and then in the next scene when Taylor's recovering, like that's the only way that was going to play out. And that may sound a bit esoteric or a bit pompous, but like structurally, this action is happening and this is the emotional response to it. And you really couldn't have one before the other. Now, conversely, before Nova has her situation, there's an emotional and vulnerability to it that then feeds into the physical manifestation of it. So sometimes it's a chicken and sometimes it's an egg situation.
Okay, well, that's a good way to put it. Okay, so I think a couple of these you already answered, so I'm just going to skip through them because they're kind of overlapped. But
Mm-hmm. Retro.
but no, because you already answered them when I asked you a couple of other questions,
Mm.
which is sufficient. But what do you want readers to take away from, or are there key lessons that you want readers to take away from books one and two?
The overall theme is family is curated.
Mhm.
Now, we all are are born and bred into a set of characters and circumstances. And depending on our life experiences, that family is sufficient and it's augmented by the people we meet throughout life. Other times, we make our family. I mean, and that's a theme that has been developed for a very long time. Comedically, that's what Friends was about. If you do the superhero world, that's what the Fantastic Four or the Avengers is about. Um, Batman is a bachelor, but he's got lots of kids. You know, all of his Robins and Alfred is his dad. Like they're you surrogates in a sense. So the primary theme of Team Justice, I believe, is this idea that your family is what you make of it, and not being compatible doesn't matter.
Hmm.
Because as individuals, these five characters should not be able to coexist, right? Each of the archetypes and each of the personalities that I've fleshed into individual humans wouldn't normally, but of their own choice, be in the
Hmm.
same room. Like, and
Hmm.
that's what high school forces us to do, right? It forces us to
Right,
be in a room with people that we would never choose to be.
right.
But sometimes you find missing pieces, and each of them complement each other in a certain way. And something that I look forward to developing a bit further is interactions between two or three of them at a time, or ones like in book one, Taylor and Zach sit at a table and like say nothing because it's the first time they've ever been together, and why would they interact? And Zach, of course, references that and expounds on it. In book two, there's a scene where Cameron and Max are having an interaction where it it brings a central conflict into play that will probably be expanded on in the development of book three.
Okay.
So the theme of curated family, and then I guess the idea that adolescent growth is a bit overly done, but I suppose the realization that you are it is not your fault when you are what you become.
Okay. That's interesting. You want to expound on that?
No. Um, so the one of the devices that I used in this idea of superpowers was personality traits, and there being a specific gene that determines personality. Now that could raise this entire social debate of is it nature versus nurture, right? That argument is as old as time.
Yeah.
I believe that they take turns, nature versus nurture. Sometimes it's 49, 51%. Sometimes it's 99 and 1. Take your pick of the two. And so I want to explore the idea that, okay, you've got a predetermined set of instructions for potential, but
Okay.
how do the decisions that you are forced to make augment that?
Okay. Okay. That makes sense. That could prompt a lot of conversation. Interesting conversation, not in a bad way though.
Mm.
That's thought provoking.
It's another reason why once I leaned into superpowers, I said,
Mhm.
okay, I'll create a library of them. I'll make some rules that govern them and so on and so forth. But the key to it being the personality traits. So it's really going to end up being an exploration of different personality traits, and they're at their highest and at their most extreme.
So is there so we have quite a bit to look forward in book three. When is book three coming out?
Whew. I don't know.
You don't
I
know.
am aching to get into the meat of it. Like I
Okay.
conceptualized this as a trilogy. So I
Mhm.
outlined one, two, and three long ago. Three, I've been
Okay.
revising the outline for the last couple of weeks because
Oh, okay.
I have to write the same way I have to eat and breathe. And
Uh-huh.
so I'm getting antsy. I'm getting antsy to start the drafting.
I'm actually looking forward to it. Now that book one and two is out, I'm like, oh my goodness, I have to read three very soon.
Well, I'm glad. I'm glad you want to. Yeah, it's interesting because between one and two,
Mhm.
between the writing of one and two, I gained some confidence in introducing other characters, not just my secondaries, the parents and my
Yeah.
cops and so on and so forth, but this idea of fleshing out some other ones and to see
Mhm.
where what their journeys are, not totally deviating from my mains, but that's the
Right.
beauty of creating of an expanded world. If
Right.
you create a
Right.
character that is interesting enough in the moment,
Yeah.
there's some
Mhm.
value in bringing them back.
Oh, absolutely. I actually love that. Um, I know you have your supporting characters or secondary characters and some of your flat characters, but sometimes it is necessary to like bring out some of those secondary or supporting characters a little bit
Mhm.
more. I'm always curious because I think sometimes there might be scenes in the book where a secondary character is, I don't know, left a little bit more underdeveloped than I would like for them to be. And I'm like, wait, no, but I need to know this or that. I need to know a backstory for this.
Mm.
So I actually like that when I'm
Well, I
reading
can
a
say
book.
definitively that 9 out of 10 characters with names
Hmm.
mean something, matter. To
Hmm.
the kids'
Hmm.
parents, at some point, we don't really know too much about Nova's mom. We haven't met her yet. We're going to. We met Max's foster parents, and
Hmm.
they're based on a couple that were dear friends of my family growing up, and so I was
Okay.
glad to be able to bring them to the world. Anderson's partners and the trainee, they all matter. In
Mhm.
fact, is it all right if I just a little bit on some of the secondaries?
Absolutely.
So Anderson is based on a gentleman that I know. He's actually my mom's best friend's husband, and he is now since retired law enforcement. But
Hmm.
he became critical in the sense that I needed I needed someone who was conflicted, someone who enforces the law, but
Hmm.
is still has some nebulous approaches to things.
Hmm.
And I love that man dearly, like the actual character, and I really enjoy writing for him now. Introducing his family means something, and so I look forward to that. With his partner, part of the beauty of writing is that you get to, if not reference, if not directly quote, if not while
Hmm.
respecting copyrights and intellectual property, but
Right.
some things that you like and love. And
Hmm.
so um, Anderson's partner Falaci is based partially on a character in the Law and Order franchise.
Hmm. I
Um,
did see that name. I
and
was mispronouncing it.
oh yeah, it's because she was a character on my favorite iteration of Law and Order, which is Criminal Intent. And
Okay.
yeah, and the junior officer Finney, she's kind of inspired by a news anchor in San Diego. I thought, what would it be like to take a very professional young blonde person and make her a cop and kind of do all that
Mhm.
stuff. So that's why I've done her. But the most important secondary character, I think, aside that's not family, is Dr. Goslin.
Okay.
I wanted with Dr. Goslin, I needed a parental figure for my team. I
Mhm.
wanted someone who exuded, who knew the stuff, and so who could be expository without hopefully being sterile, but
Mhm.
also someone who had a deep connection to certainly one of the kids, but eventually all of them. As someone who wasn't maternal, being forced into that role,
Right.
and so that's someone who I really enjoy writing about and writing for, and in fact, without spoiling, so book two,
Mhm.
there's a letter that Max doesn't get to read, and I actually wrote that letter. I know what it says. I know what it is. And I suppose after book three is out, I may do what Zack Snyder does and do an ultimate edition where I put all three of them together. And in the
Okay.
and in the extras, I'll probably throw in that letter and some other things.
Oh, that's going to be really cool. Well, I'm definitely looking forward to book three and adding it to my collection. I've thoroughly enjoyed reading your books. I'll probably read them again because when I love a book, sometimes I find myself reading it two and three times.
Uh, have you been able to enjoy it with the music, the suggested music?
No, no. Now I'm gonna have to do that. No, I haven't. I
Well,
haven't.
that's the thing about writing, or whether it's for the screen or for in general, a lot of times people are inspired by music or they think this plays this. And so there are certain chapters that were directly inspired by a piece of music. And then the opposite is true where I wrote this and said, ooh, it would be cool if this was in there. You know, sometimes the music drove the scene, sometimes the scene demanded the music. And
Oh,
while I don't own any of the music or rights, it is a
okay.
suggestion that, it's a more immersive experience when you get to hear something and either the lyrics or the tone or the theme of the song plays into what you just read.
I suppose you're right. You're not the first author who's done that. There was another author who used to be he was my eighth grade math teacher, so I've known him for
Oh,
many
wow.
years. And yes, he has a book that he wrote with that same concept, with certain music for certain chapters or certain scenes. But
Hmm.
I've never tried it. I've never
It is
tried.
interesting because art is ephemeral, which is a highfalutin statement to make and can't really be explained. But I will say this though, like there have been times when I've read something and I hear a piece of music that is, and it's not my own writing. I've read something and I go, ooh, why does this make me feel? So the beauty about music is that it is the language of emotion.
Mhm.
And with the written word, that's why musicals work. A director once said that the character in a musical starts singing because there is no other means of expressing what's in their heart than in song. And
Right.
I feel
Right.
like writing and music are complementary. So I've had fun curating the playlists for books one and two and three. And in fact, the genesis there's a scene in book three where it's my kids going out on their first adventure, and I have
Okay.
the beat that plays that scene. And once I heard that, I was like, yeah, and it's amping me up to start writing that.
Okay. Well, I'm definitely going to try it. Because like I said, honestly, like you can suggest music to me all day. I'm just gonna read that scene straight through. And it's not that I'm not interested. It's just that, once I'm in a set frame of mind, I just want to
Hmm.
go straight through. But I promise you I will try it. And I'll have to
Oh,
follow up with you and tell you, okay, this is what I experienced from that. You were right, it is immersive.
ah. Yeah, it's also something that I just enjoy doing because
Mhm.
in the dreamed of event that this becomes something other than words on a page. Now we know who to buy licensing rights from. For what? Like,
Right. Right.
if this were to become a form of media other than a novel, it would be adamant. I'd be adamant about having certain pieces included. So
Yeah. Yeah.
this is one of
Because it
those things where it's like, you know exactly where I'm at with that, etc.
mhm. See, so you already have it planned out. I can definitely see this unfolding on a screen. I definitely can. I
I
really
would like
can.
I would like that too, or in a highly animated, stylized animated
Hmm.
format, limited series, whatnot. But this is where the author part of me gets a little protective and selfish,
Hmm.
really, because and this is a very pedestrian excuse, but it's like once it goes on screen, it becomes less about the characters and more about the people portraying them. And so,
Okay.
and unless you are this works one of two ways. You look at Forrest Gump and you go, Tom Hanks is a great actor portraying this character.
Hmm.
You look at the Avengers or anything in the DC universe and you go, wow, this character did these things, and I'm not sure if I liked how it was done. So the
Hmm.
attachment to the character versus the actor is something that's not a struggle I want to to put up with. So I kind of like having complete creative
Hmm.
control in a sense of I will tell you how much these characters matter when they should.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah, I get it. So let's say you do. Let's put it out there. Let's say that this does unfold on the big screen or on or as a series. Would you would you desire to be involved in the screenwriting, converting this to the screenwriting for the screen, and all of that and choosing the
absolutely.
character? Okay. Okay.
Part of my writing process is every chapter I write it like a screenplay where it's scene, dialogue, in parentheses, whatever action takes place, dialogue,
Mhm.
in parentheses, the next piece of action. And then I
Yeah.
convert that. In fact, sorry, let me just grab this really quick. This is okay. So, chapter 15 of book two. No, sorry, maybe it's 12. This is such a pretentious author thing to do. The chapter, which is the podcast, chapter 13,
Okay.
in two, that is how I write every single one of my chapters. I write the character name and then their dialogue in parentheses.
Hmm.
I clicked it up and made it look a little more professional, where you identify who's speaking it, whatever. But that's how I write every single chapter of my book, and so that was an opportunity for me to just not quite copy and paste step one of
Uh-huh.
the process, but that is the approach that I take. So I do take my writing very in a very cinematic sense.
Yeah. Yeah, I can definitely tell. Well, this was really nice, Cameron or C.A. Gordon. What do
Oh,
you
I'm
recommend?
spoiled. The biggest spoiler of them all.
Oh my
Now,
God, I'm so sorry.
now CA is my first and middle name. My name is Cameron Allen Gordon, but all the writers that I love have initials for their pen names. R.L. Stein, K. Applegate, J.K. All you
You
just
know
got to.
what? I did the same thing. I go by DC Head, so
That's good stuff, right?
yes,
So,
yes.
uh,
Great minds think alike.
right. Oh, also, I realized I didn't change my Zoom name.
That's what I was looking at. I'm like, oh, because I was gonna ask you.
Oh, well, yes. Hey, this has been a blast. Thank you so much for having me.
Yes, absolutely. But before we go, C.A. Gordon, why don't you tell everyone where to follow you on social media and where they can find you on the website?
Okay, so get a look. I am on Instagram at CA Gordon underscore author.
Okay.
And I now have a website that I made courtesy of Wix. So it's cagordonauthor.wixsite.com/welcome. It's a little long, but it was either that or connect domain that I don't have yet. But
Okay.
and also on Facebook, I believe at CA Gordon author, and on Twitter, but I never, excuse me, X. I never use the X.
Mhm.
So, but CA Gordon author um, on Instagram and CA Gordon author.wixsite.com/welcome.
Okay, and I'll definitely put that in the video once we upload it to YouTube, and everyone will know where to follow you on Instagram, Facebook, and on your website, and also to get both book one and book two on Amazon.
Yep,
So
it's
I'll include
available on
those links as
Amazon. I did book one also through Barnes and Noble. My main distributor now is Ingram Spark, and they're cool enough to do a direct link from my website. So if you go to my website and click buy on either book one or book two, their pages, it'll take you directly to the landing page for Ingram.
Okay, awesome. That is good to know. So I'll make sure that that information is uploaded on YouTube. Thank you, Cameron.